Okay. Thumbs up, you hear? So first of all, disclaimer here, although I'm on a screen that says Charles Goldberg, I'm not Charles Goldberg. I am Rabbi Khan from the Chabad in Medford. I'm in the presence of Rabbi Mangel from Chabad here in Cherry Hill. The mic is for the people on the Zoom, and my voice, you hear me? You need to, okay, I'm going to try to speak a little bit louder. We have people actually here in person and on the World Wide Web on Zoom. So we are doing a hybrid over here. Everybody in the crowd wave, not that we could see you, but everybody in the crowd wave, everybody on Zoom, let's wave. This is a joint program between Chabad in Cherry Hill and Chabad in Medford. The Rabbinical College of America, which is the seat of Chabad of New Jersey, started a couple of years ago a mental health initiative. And with the help of the state, we are able to provide programs all over New Jersey and also bringing it here to South Jersey on the area of mental health, which is something that we could all in our world benefit from, right? You hear me clearly? Okay, we're going to try to up the volume. In any case, we are lucky to have here Charles Goldberg. Charles Goldberg is a clinical psychotherapist. He works with people of all ages with depression, anxiety, grief, and relationships. He's traveled around the world and lectured in over 40 Chabad centers. And actually this week, he's going to be in the heart of Chabad Lubavitch in Crown Heights, Brooklyn, addressing a couple of thousand teens who are gathered there for the Sitin Shabbaton. We have our own Yoni Shachar in the crowd, who's going to be leading one of the groups there. We have a group here being led by Chana Mangel as well in Crown Heights. So it is wonderful to have Charles, who is going to share with us insight in this area. But the beauty is, besides the fact that Charles is a clinical psychotherapist, I just gave him a good title. He's a Jewish mystic as well. He carries that together with him, because whenever we deal with, in the medical world, especially in the mental health world, the Torah has so much what to contribute and really gives us tools, fundamental tools, and how to deal with the challenges that we face on our day-to-day life. So I'm not going to steal his thunder here. It's wonderful to see everyone here in the virtual world, the personal world. And without any further ado, I welcome to the podium, Charles Goldberg.
Hi, everyone. So yeah, on Zoom and in person, this is a lot of fun. So it was actually quite a bit of fun. The rabbi called me up a few weeks ago, and he says to me, Charles, listen, rumor has it, you balance on one head a yarmulke, a beard, and a man bun. Teach me your secrets. And like, well, the rabbi keeps on growing hair the wrong side of his head. We're working on it. But very, very grateful to be here and share a little bit of mental health and Kabbalistic wisdom. So first and foremost, let's kind of jump right into what psychotherapy actually is. So what we have to understand, I actually, like any good Jewish boy, we could either be a doctor, lawyer, an accountant. That's pretty much all we got. Maybe a rabbi if we're feeling really special. But for the most part, I come from a family of doctors. And, there's a big difference between medicine and mental health. So think about it like this, if God forbid, let's say I get shot in the shoulder, nothing terribly important is up there. Let's say I get, God forbid, shot in the shoulder, and I go to see a medical doctor. What's that doctor going to do for me? He's going to pull the bullet out. He's going to patch me up, maybe give me a pain med if I'm lucky. But throughout that experience, the doctor has fixed me. As a clinician, as a mental health clinician, I can't fix anyone. This is both the best and worst part of my job. It's the best part of my job because I'm not entirely responsible for my clients' outcomes, but it's the worst part of my job because I became a therapist to actually help people. Okay. So at the end of the day, what I always tell my patients and my audiences is that in mental health, imagine if, God forbid, you have a gunshot wound. I can't pull the bullet out of you, but what I can do, and what we'll be doing tonight, is teaching you how to pull the bullet out of yourselves. Meaning, if you're suffering, if you're going through something, no one can fix you mental health wise except for you. This is a very important thing. However, where a lot of people falter is they don't even know where to begin. Now, luckily, the Torah, Hasidic philosophy gives us tons and tons of information on these topics, which I'd like to relay with you tonight. So I figure what we're going to do first is we're going to jump headfirst in. Tonight, what I'm going to be talking to you about is some of the deepest teachings of Judaism, things that up until about 300 years ago, you weren't allowed to study unless you were 40 years old. Okay, I'm not 40 yet, so like it's kind of cool. Anyway, the thing that we have to understand is that these lessons have sustained Jewish people for generations. So let's first begin with a very interesting question. As Jews, we believe that God is infinite, right? If God is infinite, means he takes up all time, he takes up all space, right? So the question that the ancient Kabbalists, these Jewish mystics living in the north of Israel, would ask is, they said, well, wait a second. If God is infinite and takes up all time and all space, how could there be enough room for anything to exist outside of God? Does everyone understand the question? If God takes up all time and all space, how could it be that anything else in the world could fit? And, we even know from Newton's law, it basically says that two separate objects cannot occupy the same space. This is my microphone cover. So if I'm holding a microphone cover in this particular space, nothing else can penetrate that space, right? And if you want to tell me like, oh, well, God is purely spiritual. Well, I mean, look, as soon as I move the case out of the way, air molecules fill it up. Okay, so at the end of the day, if God is truly taking up all time and all space, how could it be that anything finite actually exists? So listen to the answer that's given. This is quite mind-blowing. The ancient Kabbalists say that in order for the world to be created, God had to contract himself. He had to pull himself back in order to make space for the world to exist. It's a pretty crazy thing. And by the way, I could literally do a whole class on just this topic. Okay, because if you think about it, I'm sure we have people here with children and grandchildren. Has anyone, could someone tell me, how does a contraction feel when you're having one? Is it comfortable, uncomfortable? It's relatively uncomfortable. In fact, I would say it's excruciatingly painful. This is how the world was created. In order for the world to be created, God literally had to be in an uncomfortable place. This is unbelievable. Okay, because all creation parallels this process. All creative processes parallel this process. It always starts from a place of discomfort. Right here, I believe this is the true essence, the secret of the Jewish people. Because other people, when they're facing discomfort, they run away. They run away. They want to numb themselves. They want to distance themselves. Okay, there's a famous meme that's floating around on social media, and it's quite beautiful. They say, the world tried to bury me, but they didn't know I was a seed. This is the Jewish spirit, okay? At the end of the day, Jewish people have always faced difficulty. They have always faced challenge. But instead of running away from this discomfort, we lean into it. If you're going to take one thing away from tonight's session, be brave enough to lead into discomfort, because this is the basis, this is the beginning of every creative process. This is how we know we're growing, okay? So what we also have to recognize is that the story doesn't end there. So here God uncomfortably contracts himself, he pulls himself back, and now there's this empty void. So what gets created first? Anyone know? Flips on the light and there's light, right? So as Hasidus explains, as Kabbalah explains, there was first a white light, a diffuse light, that was later narrowed down into a single line. And the thing that we have to understand about light, which is so interesting, is that light always has to have something to reflect off of. Light always has to reflect off of something. You see my speaker box right here. I'm sorry, guys, on Zoom, you can't really see it, but I have a little box that connects my microphone to my camera. It's red. The only reason why we see red here is because all the other wavelengths of light are being absorbed and red is being reflected out. So if you have light that isn't being reflected, you can't really appreciate it. So God has light in this vacuous space, and now he wanted to make this light slightly more tangible. So as the story goes, God created vessels. Okay, now, of course, there's the famous opinion, 2 Jews, 10 opinions, right? So there are 10 different vessels that God created, but we debate, which ones they actually were. Okay, tonight we're going to be talking about a bunch of them. But the thing that's interesting about the first vessels is that they were disconnected. They weren't able to communicate with one another, and therefore they became very arrogant. So God's, vessel of love basically said, I'm way better than you, God's vessel of discipline. And ultimately what ended up happening to these vessels is they exploded. So God's like, great, okay, I have this vacuous space, bunch of broken vessels. Now what do I do? So God creates the world, the next physical thing to contain the broken pieces of these vessels. Now, this is pretty remarkable, okay? Because who here, raise your hand if you've ever heard the term tikkun olam? Have you guys heard of it? What's tikkun olam? Mending the world. What people don't understand, we think of tikkun olam, I volunteer in a food shelter, I donate clothes, things like that. No, tikkun olam is actually a deeply Kabbalistic term. The entire idea is that we are trying to heal the broken vessels that are encapsulated within the world. Now, how could we do this? Remember that God created us, human beings, in his image. What does it mean to be in his image? What it means is that human beings have the capacity to interact with the world in the exact same way God does. We are the only creative things on this planet. Now, I know like beavers build dams and stuff like that, but I think we've progressed a little bit past that, just ever so slightly, okay? So the idea is that human beings were literally created to recognize and heal these broken pieces. This is unbelievable. Now, what we're going to do, now that I've shared this entire legend with you, this story with you, now what we have to do is we have to think about how this looks practically, okay? So let's think about it like this. First off, I want to tell you about grad school. When I was in graduate school, I literally didn't learn anything. Biggest waste of like $180, $180,000, a little bit different than 180. $180,000 is a huge waste. They don't teach you anything about being a counselor in graduate school, literally nothing. I wrote all of my papers 2 hours before they were due. It's ridiculous, okay? Where I learned how to really be a therapist was from Hasidus, was from Hasidic philosophy, but something very interesting. I went to school in Chicago. Actually, I went to undergrad in Kansas. I dated Dorothy. We broke up. There was a custody battle over Toto. You can imagine. And what's great is most rabbis have no idea what I'm referencing right now. That's really fun. But the thing is, yeah, any idea? Any idea, rabbis? No? Okay, cool. So the thing is I went to school. I did my master's at DePaul University, the nation's largest Catholic university. Perfect place for a nice Jewish boy to be going. But the thing is that was really like meaningful and deep is I realized I couldn't approach this profession in the standard way. And the thing that's really annoying to me, that drove me absolutely crazy more than anything about grad school, is in the state of Illinois, if you're going to become a therapist, you have to take a history class. You have to take a history class. I think it's ridiculous. Why do I need to know about the history of psychology when I'm already in graduate school? But that was the thing. And the thing that really drove me crazy is, what did they say in the history class? They asked the question, who are the first therapists in the world? Who were the first therapists? What did they say? The ancient Greeks and the ancient Romans. Now, if you know anything about Jewish history, we don't like ancient Greeks and Romans didn't exactly treat Jews very nicely, to put it lightly, right? And immediately I said to myself, that cannot be true. There's got to be more here. And that's what started my investigation. That's where I began digging, okay? And it's actually interesting. In 1993, there was a famous psychologist. Her name was Marsha Linehan. And Marsha Linehan created something called dialectical behavior therapy, or what my patients call it, diabolical behavior therapy. They absolutely love it. Point is that this therapy, this entire notion, so Marsha Linehan recognized that she behaved in a way that was very extreme. There are certain people in this life who, unfortunately, their approaches to things become very extreme. They become very black and white, right? And the problem with that is when we are black and white in our approach to things, very rarely are we going to be correct about things, okay? So like, for instance, I worked with this gentleman. I love telling the story. He himself was an accountant living in Chicago, and for fun, he liked to drive for Uber, right? So it's New Year's Eve, which you can imagine is a great day in Chicago to drive for Uber. And anyway, he recognized he was living in a triplex, and on the side of this triplex were 3 parking spots. Well, someone had blocked his car in. So his idea is he took a baseball bat and he destroyed the car that was parked behind him. And hence he landed in my office, okay? So when I asked him, I said, perchance do you think there was a different way we could have responded to this situation? And he's like, yeah, I shouldn't have driven at all. Notice the very polarized views here. Okay. And unfortunately, that's not going to really work too well for anyone for that matter. So then I talk to him and we do this thing where we think about balanced responses, right? So this lady, Marsha Linehan, who created dialectical behavior therapy, what is a dialectic? We have to ask ourselves, what's a dialectic? So what she says a dialectic is you have a thesis. Everyone knows what a thesis is. It's a point, right? Conversely, you have its opposite, an antithesis, an antithesis, a fancy way of saying its opposite. And then you have something called a synthesis, something that blends these two polarized opposites together, right? So this was Marsha Linehan's incredible theory. She was basically saying, yeah, you know what? What we're doing is we're teaching people to live in a balanced way. This is what we do. We look at the extremes of behavior and then we try to find a better response. We try to have our clients come up with a better response. Now, here's the thing. Everyone credits Marsha Linehan with this theory in 1993. And by the way, it's one of the leading theories in psychotherapy today. But it wasn't Marsha Linehan who came up with it. In my eyes, what I personally believe, it was Avraham Avinu, the man who's credited with writing one of the most important books of Kabbalah, a book called Sefer Yetzirah. Okay, so what we have to kind of understand now is how this relates to us as Jews. So what I'd like, we actually have a handout and I'm going to share my screen here on Zoom. And let's take a peek. Wow, we have 60 people on Zoom. That's pretty great. What we're going to do is let's just take a peek at this and we'll kind of go from there. My man over here is going to be handing these out. And here we go. Can everyone see this on Zoom? Can people see this tree of life, basically this diagram? Can everyone see that? Yep.
Yes, we could. Just if you want to
zoom in a little bit.
Zoom in a little, unless you're going through different parts of it, just zoom in a little bit.
Just a touch, okay? So what we have to look at right now is, remember I told you about this entire notion of these 10 attributes that God used to create the world, right? So now we're going to actually look at these inside. Now, this is the thing that's really interesting. You know, when you're in graduate school to become a therapist, what they always talk to you about is something called the biopsychosocial model. Meaning when you look at a patient, you want to look at them biologically, what's going on brain chemistry wise, psychologically, what's going on in their minds, and socially, how do they interact with other people, right? So too, and this is the thing that's interesting, Kabbalah actually has a method of conceptualizing people as well. So let's take a look at some of these things. We're on the diagram where, again, we have about 10 circles that are there if everyone wants to follow along with me. So at the very top, we have something called Keser. This is the one of the ones that's debated, right? Some people say it's Keser, other people say it's this one Das. What Keser is the crown. What is the crown? What does it represent? It is our capacity to have pleasure, to have faith, and to have freedom. Our capacity as human beings is heavily dictated by this. In fact, well, I'll get there in a minute. Then we also have the blue circles are the intellectual traits that we possess, okay? We have chokhmah, which is wisdom. We have bina, which is understanding. And then we have da'at, knowledge, okay? Has anyone heard of these sefirot, these traits before? Do they sound familiar to anyone? Why do they sound familiar? Chabad, exactly. And in fact, what's so beautiful about Chabad, what's so amazing about Chabad is that, you know, it was the Alter Rebbe who basically postulated we can connect to God intellectually. We could logically connect to God. That sounds kind of crazy, but if you think about it, it makes sense. It makes perfect sense. Logically, there are ways of connecting to God, and that's what Chabad really emphasizes. If you read Tanya, if you read all of these other Hasidic books, this is where it's happening. So we have these intellectual capacities that God blesses us with. Then we have the emotional ones, okay? So we have the next three. We have Chesed, Gevura, and Tiferet. Chesed is loving kindness. Gevura is the opposite, it's severity. And then you have beauty, Tiferet. Okay, beauty actually expresses itself as compassion, right? And then at the very bottom, we also have Netzach, the ability to overcome external obstacles. We have Hod, splendor, the ability to overcome internal obstacles. And then we have Yesod, foundation, the ability to be kind of compassionate to people, to be able to be connected to people, to be able to, you know, kind of connect. And the very last one is kingship on the very bottom. And kingship is super interesting because it's our capacity as human beings to recognize that really we're all one. We all come from the same creator. We're all one community. And the thing that's really interesting about this, and this is what we're taught, God's attributes, God's 10 attributes that we see here are perfectly balanced. It's God, he's perfect, right? But as human beings, our sefirot, these traits, are not in balance. And as a result, it's our job over the course of our lives to try our best to seek some kind of balance with them. What was that? And by the way, we're going to take questions at the very end of this. So please save your questions. Don't forget them. I promise we'll have plenty of time because this is some deep information that we're going over. Okay. But what I want to do tonight, and especially in terms of anxiety, depression, psychotherapy, what I really want to focus on are the three intellectual capacities that we possess. Okay. Chokhmah, Bina, and Das. Let's go inside and learn about Chabad on a totally new level. So what we have to understand before we begin, first off, remember what we said. Marshall Linehan came up with this dialectical behavior therapy. So we have a thesis over here. We have an antithesis, an antithesis, its opposite, and then we have a synthesis. Is anyone seeing any parallel here? Are we seeing it at all? Okay, it's pretty cool. In fact, Judaism came up with this entire notion of a balanced approach way before Marshall Linehan ever did. Now, what we have to do is we have to dig deep and we have to get an understanding of how these things function. So did anyone here ever learn about the two different sides of our soul? Or the different sides of our soul? Have you guys ever taken class about that? So just as a refresher course, right? Hasidus, Jewish Mysticism explains that every person has a soul, right? It's a soul that contains these attributes that God has. And within our souls, right, things are sometimes a little out of balance. But at the same time, the point of having a soul is that the soul is at war with itself. We have two sides of our soul that we really have to pay attention to. We have the animalistic side of our soul. It's the part of our soul that eats, drinks, and sleeps. And then we also have the godly side of our soul, the side of our soul that wants to do mitzvot, to connect with God in this world, right? Now, actually, there's this ancient Native American story about these two souls. They basically say that there was a boy who was talking to his grandfather, and his grandfather says, within you lives two wolves, right? One wolf is a good wolf and does wonderful things and contributes to the pack. And then you have another wolf who's very selfish. So the boy asks a very profound question. He says, grandfather, how do I know which wolf is going to be stronger? And the grandfather says, whichever one you feed the most. Whichever side of our soul we feed the most is what's going to express ourselves. What are the two sides of the soul warring over? They are warring over control of the body, right? So we have to ask ourselves, what is it that we're channeling? What is our soul channeling? How is our soul conducting and impacting our behavior? So what we're going to look at is we're going to look at different aspects of these three intellectual sefirot, these intellectual traits. So if you want to flip your pages over, you'll see these three blue circles. Okay, and we're going to divide them in a variety of different ways. So the first way we're going to look at it is we're going to look at the essence. Okay, the essence is literally the title. So we have Chokhmah, which is wisdom, right? Wisdom is your capacity. On the one hand, it's a tiny point that expands into a million questions, right? Then we have understanding, conversely, which is our capacity to see detail, right? And then, of course, we have da'at, which is our ability to internalize what it is that we think and actually translate it into an emotional response. Right? How many people here have known full well something that they're doing is wrong intellectually, but they can't help themselves because their feelings just aren't there? And remember, what's always more powerful? Thoughts or feelings? Our feelings are always more powerful than our thoughts. At the same time, as Jews, it basically says that, Hasidus explains that the head is always above the heart. Human beings are the only animals whose heads are above their hearts. Now, I know what you're thinking. What about giraffes? Giraffes walk on four legs. What about penguins? Well, penguins slide on their bellies from time to time. Okay, I haven't seen any sober human beings do that in a while. The point is that it is our job to always have our heads basically dictate the emotions of the heart. So let's actually look at these three different sefirot. You don't see the bottom? Oh, well, we'll get there. Let's actually look at the three, like how these things exist in real life, okay? So everyone imagine it's 1970. Everyone imagine it's 1970, okay? And I'm a medical doctor, I'm outside my hospital, and I'm smoking a cigarette, okay? So someone comes up to me and says, hey, doc, you know that's not good for you. And how does the doctor respond? What? What, are you kidding me? And if you think about it, now this one point, hey, that's not good for you, gives rise to all of these questions. Well, what do you mean it's not good for me? How much of them do I need to smoke in order for it not to be good to me? How is it impacting me? What is it actually doing? All these questions arise. So now the doctor goes to the side of Bina and he starts running research. He starts digging. He starts trying to figure out, okay, so are cigarettes actually bad for you? He does research and he, lo and behold, finds that in fact, cigarettes are not good for you. So what happens when the doctor takes the first point that asked all these questions, and then he takes his research and he amalgamates all of it, takes it in mind, and then stops smoking himself? Now he's reached the level of da'at, the level of knowledge. He's internalized all of this other stuff, and voila, he's now in a different place. Okay, so what we now have to do is we have to learn a little bit about psychology. This is going to be kind of interesting. So there are two major differences between anxiety and depression that we have to pay attention to. Okay, the first one is a very simple difference. The first difference is that depression is always rooted in fear, or always rooted in sadness, and anxiety is always rooted in fear. Okay, very simple. So the root emotion is different. Okay, but now this is the interesting part. Both anxiety and depression have racing thoughts associated with them, right? But if your racing thoughts are rooted in the past, you're thinking about things that happened in the past, that's depression. If your racing thoughts are related to the future, that's anxiety. Now, here's something really interesting about wisdom, understanding, and knowledge. Wisdom, if you think about it, always comes from the past. It always comes from the past, right? This wisdom that I'm bestowing upon you tonight existed way before any of us were ever alive, right? It always comes from the past. Even in Kabbalistic texts, we learn that it comes from Keser, which is also representative of the past. So wisdom always comes from the past. Conversely, let's look at understanding. Understanding is something we always arrive at. It's something that we always try to attain. It's always future-based, right? And then we also have knowledge. We even have the phrase, it's pretty colloquially used. We say current knowledge dictates, right? So this is where the Kabbalah stops and the Charles begins, okay? What I personally believe is that when our traits, when these intellectual traits of ours fall out of balance, meaning when they're channeled through the animalistic soul rather than the godly soul, they result in mental health difficulties. This is what I believe, okay? So let's look at this. In a godly soul, when we have wisdom, remember, wisdom's the ability to see the big picture. It's the ability to be abstract. If that's not happening correctly, what's going to happen? We're going to get depressed. When you can't see the big picture, well, we'll get to that in a minute, okay? You're going to get sad. Conversely, in the animalistic soul, okay, with Bina, if Bina is channeled correctly through our godly souls, it's going to look like conceptual analysis, reasoning, all of these ways that we analyze data, right? That's healthy, that's good. But if we go overboard with that, we're going to get anxious. And lastly, and this is the thing that's cool, if our capacity to internalize is not channeled correctly, what this looks like is trauma, okay? This is actually what's happening. If our ability to internalize things is not happening correctly, this is trauma. Let me prove it, okay? So a couple definitions of trauma for you to think about. What a trauma is anytime a change happens too quickly for us to internalize, right? Think about it. One day I'm able to walk, the next day, God forbid, I can't. One day I have this person in my life, the next day, God forbid, I don't. That's traumatic, okay? Another definitions, and these are coupled, another definition of trauma is when something happens that shouldn't have happened. Also, it's when something doesn't happen that should have. So based on these descriptions that I'm saying, you have to understand that everybody has trauma. Everyone has trauma. However, not everyone has post-traumatic stress. Trauma is something that happens in the past. In the present, we are stuck basically, and we become hyper vigilant. We become afraid of the same thing that happened to us in the past happening in the future. So if you think about it, trauma is past, present, and future, right? So this is the thing that's really interesting. What drives me absolutely crazy about graduate school, like the hardest part of graduate school is they don't actually, like they teach you theory. Okay, so there are 4 primary theories that we have in grad school. So we have the Freudian theory, psychoanalysis, which basically says the reason why people get screwed up in life is because of things that happened to them in the past. That was Freud's gig. He was all about that, right? Then we also have a guy, his name was Alfred Adler, and also another one who was really cool was Viktor Frankl. Maybe some of you know who he is, Man's Search for Meaning, right? One of the best books ever written. And Viktor Frankl, he was actually laughed at by the psychological community because everyone was kind of ruling by Freud. And what Frankl said was unbelievable. In his book, Man's Search for Meaning, he recognized that when people suffer, it's because they can't see a future for themselves. When they don't feel a purpose in life, that's what causes suffering, which is completely opposite of what Freud says. Then we also have the cognitive behavioral theorists, the people like Aaron Beck, who basically say, oh, well, you know what? The reason why people get messed up is because they have uncomfortable thoughts and feelings, right? And then lastly, we have the systemic people like, I don't know, Minuchin, other therapists like that. And what they say is the reason why people suffer is because they're lacking connection in their lives. Now, if you think about this, all of these theories are true to a certain extent, right? I'm very into what's called being an integrative therapist, meaning we integrate all these different theories when we work with a client. It's never just one thing. There are some people who are purists, not my way of doing things, okay? But what we have to understand is that, you know, we have to take into consideration why people get messed up. And the problem is, and this is the worst part about being a therapist in graduate school, they don't teach you how to fix it. So you learn all these theories and then you're sent out to work with clients. And most therapists, I'm not even kidding, I have 40 clients on my caseload right now. 7 of them are therapists who are coming to see me because they don't feel like they really know how to help people. Okay. And by the way, I think many people have had negative experiences with therapists. That was the reason why I became a therapist. I went to see a therapist when I was a kid. It was a punishment for being a naughty boy. I was kind of a naughty boy pre-Kapata. And I love it when parents are like, that's it. You need to get help and, you know, do something really healthy for you. It's a punishment. But my therapist was terrible. He was an awful therapist. And I knew I could always do better. So the idea is that we have to, the thing that I love about this theory that I'm presenting here is that it also gives rise to a way of treating these disorders. Okay, this is the thing that's really cool. Now we're actually going to talk about intervention. Okay, so you have anxiety, you have depression, you've got some trauma. What can we actually do about it? This is where it gets really cool. Okay, so what I want you to do is look at your 3 circles, and you'll recognize that let's start over here with depression, okay? When chokhmah, wisdom, gets out of line, okay? So what do we do to fix this? Well, we go in the opposite direction. There's actually, it's something really interesting. There's a technique that comes from jujitsu. Haha, J-E-W, gotta love the puns, it's Chabad, come on, there's always a pun. So you have, in jujitsu, instead of actually, you know, taking a punch and blocking it, what jujitsu says is take the punch and actually hyperextend it, right? Hyperextension. This is actually where this theory is coming from. If something is happening in one realm, we're going to go to the opposite side, right? So if a person is depressed, we're going to do this in steps. You'll notice the line going down the middle that represents the present. So we're first going to take the depressed person and we're going to bring them to the present. We're going to say, hey, all that stuff that you went through, all of that stuff that you're ruminating about, it's done now. It's over. And there's nothing you could do to fix it. Right? People always freak out about like, oh, you know, stuff isn't in my control and this is so hard. Why would you be worried about stuff that isn't in your control? It's not in your control. So the first step that we're going to do with a depressed person is we're going to bring them to the present moment and we're going to say to them, look, what happened? It's done now. But that's not where it stops. Now what we have to do is we have to take the depressed person and show them a future. Let's understand something, and this is kind of heavy, okay? Think about this. If I'm really depressed, the number one symptom of depression is hopelessness. What is hopelessness? Hopelessness is an inability to see an alternative future for oneself, right? I'm stuck. So if you show a person the future and you say, hey, look, despite everything that you went through, you could author your future any way that you like. You restore people's hope. You know, there's a beautiful saying in the Talmud. It's also a Modest Yahoo song. I don't know if you guys heard the song Chop 'em Down. From the forest itself comes the handle to the axe, right? Okay, this is actually a direct quote from the Talmud. From the forest itself comes the handle to the axe. What does this mean? The forest is the obstacle. The solution to taking down the obstacle lies within the obstacle itself. So what does this mean? It means that within the problem lies the solution. Think about it. If I go, God forbid, to a doctor because my side is hurting me, right? What's the first thing the doctor is going to try to do? Well, take away the pain, but he needs to know where the pain is coming from in order to do that, right? If you don't know what the problem is, how can you fix it? So this is the beautiful idea about this, is we actually know where the root is. And if we attack the root and then take it to the next level and we say, hey, you know what, you're depressed, let's see an alternative future, people are going to grow tremendously. It's unbelievable. And actually, I'm going to tell you one more secret about depression. One more secret about depression. I'm going to tell you a story that you've never heard in a Chabad house before. It's a story that rabbis haven't started repeating yet. Okay, but I'm going to teach you one of the cures for depression, one of the ways that people can cure themselves of depression. So it's a true story. There was once a man, he was living in Cambodia, right? He was a rice paddy farmer. I don't know if you guys have seen a rice paddy before, but basically, if you can imagine, just like when you cook rice, it needs a ton of water. Rice always needs a ton of water also to grow, right? So what ends up happening is this gentleman, he's working in his rice paddy, and one day, and he's a fourth generation rice paddy farmer. This is the only thing that he knows how to do. He's been doing this literally since he could walk. He's working in his rice paddy one day, he steps down on a landmine and blows off his leg. Oy vey. So the other rice paddy farmers in the area, they see the explosion. They get this guy in an ambulance. He's immediately sent to the hospital, emergency surgery, clean outs, everything like that. He's very swollen. It's about a month before the swelling goes down. And then he's fitted with a prosthetic leg. And then they find out that, oh yeah, this guy works with his feet in the water. So he needs a special prosthesis. And after 90 days of being away from his rice paddy, it's time for him to return to the rice paddy. So here's a question for you. If the last time you guys were at your place of work and your leg got blown off, how are you going to feel about going back? You're going to be terrified. Okay. And beyond terrified, when we face trauma, there is a three-part response that many of us are familiar with, right? It's either fight, flight, or freeze. Which one is the worst? Freeze. Why is freeze the worst one? You're stuck. You can't do anything. Okay. By the way, this is why childhood trauma is so terrible, because, you know, when I'm like 7 and I'm this big, it's not like I can fight back. I'm this big and I can't run away. It's not like, oh, you know, forget you guys, I'm staying in a hotel tonight. Like, you're 7. You can't do that. You're stuck. And that's exactly where our gentleman found himself. He was stuck in this rice paddy. And what happened? He became hopeless. He was unable to see an alternative future for himself. Why? Because he needed to earn money. That was the only thing he knew how to do. So he becomes very, very depressed, and his family takes him to see a psychiatrist, a slew of psychiatrists. Now, here's the thing, okay? I am not one of these people who's like, oh yeah, don't take psych meds, blah, 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 blah. Not about that, okay? But unfortunately, what happens with a lot of people taking antidepressants is that they enter this cycle where they take a medication, it works for a time period, it wears off, you go back to the doctor, it works, it wears off, you go back to a doctor. And unfortunately, for a lot of people, they get very hopeless through this thing. Now, I will tell you, let me ask this question. What do you think is more effective, psychotherapy or, you know, actually taking psych meds? Jewish question. In fact, 1,500 studies have shown the best outcomes are attained with both combined, okay? Because at the end of the day, if you think about it, it makes perfect sense, right? If I am super depressed and I'm too depressed to actually utilize the skills taught in counseling, well, then obviously I need somebody to get me to baseline. However, there's no such thing as a miracle pill. Now, this guy wasn't doing counseling and he was expecting this pill to be a miracle, and it did not work until one day his family finds out that there's a famous doctor flying to Cambodia, and they are absolutely determined to get this gentleman an appointment with him. So he goes and meets this gentleman, pours out his heart and soul to the guy, and the guy says, I know exactly what you need. He calls in the dude's family and he says to them, listen, I am writing you a prescription for a cow. I'm writing you a prescription for a cow. Take this gentleman, pool your resources, buy a cow, teach him how to become a dairy farmer, teach him how to use the milk to make cheese and yogurt, ice cream, things like that. Let's see what happens. What happens to the gentleman? He gets better. The cow was an antidepressant. So here's the question. Why? He saw a future. He was not hopeless anymore. And here's the most important thing. When I ask my clients, what is sadness? What is sadness? They tell me, oh, it's a lump in your stomach. It's a lump in your throat. It's unpleasant. It's darkness, all these metaphorical things. It's not what sadness is. How does sadness function? Sadness is the state human beings enter when our needs are not being met. Now, yep, Maslow, you nailed it. That's exactly right. Okay, I don't know if you heard what this gentleman said, but yeah, Steve, of course, that's exactly right. This is something really interesting. People ask me all the time, Charles, You realize as a therapist, I could be faced with literally any problem on the face of the planet. You have no idea the crazy things that I have heard and experienced as a professional. Okay. People tell me their secrets. It's actually really cool. Okay. But every problem imaginable comes through my door: grief, loss, anxiety, depression, marital issues, psychosis, addiction, all kinds of fun stuff comes through my door. So how in the world am I, this simple mystic? I could totally see my wife saying, "Oh, Charles, you're such a mystic. Now use your mysticism to wash the dishes." It's great. But like the thing is how is it that I can know how to meet everyone's needs? It's very simple, because what Maslow's postulates, and this is something we could talk about in more depth at a different time, but like all human beings have the same needs. If you have an understanding of human needs, you could basically help yourself or help anyone. So the smartest thing you could do if you have a friend or you yourself are depressed, you have to ask yourself the question, what do I need? What do I need? And if you ask that question, you're going to begin finding a path to get help and get better. So now that we've talked about depression, let's really break down anxiety, okay? And we're going to go super deep into this one, okay? So again, we're starting on the left side, right? We're going to bring ourselves to the present moment. Remember, anxiety is based in what? The past or the future? Which one? Future, right? So we're going to start with the future. I'm having these worries about what's to come. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring myself to the present moment, okay? I tell an anxious person, look, you're so worried about all this stuff happening right here, right now. Everything is fine. You're good. You're worried about stuff that hasn't even happened yet. Like, chill out right here, right now. Everything is cool. Everything is kosher. But then this is the part that people overlook. Take the anxious person back to the past. Let me explain what I mean by this, okay? So I want anyone who has a pen, this is a good thing to write down, okay? All anxiety stems from one thing and one thing only. There is only one thing in life that causes anxiety. Does anyone know what that is? Actually, no, it's the unknown. A lot of people think it's fear, but you have to understand why fear arises from the unknown is we are afraid that within the unknown lies a challenge that is going to be too difficult for us to handle as people. Makes sense, right? So what we have to understand, if anxiety is all rooted in the unknown, let's do a little demonstration. So this is what's unknown. This is what's known. Obviously, there's going to be a gap between these two things. Why? Because you can't know what's unknown. Duh. So how do we bridge that gap? Listen to this. Where knowledge stops, faith begins. Where knowledge stops, faith begins. Meaning, when I'm approaching the unknown, I can't get there. So where my knowledge stops, faith begins. So all you need to do is you need to have faith in two things. You need to have faith in yourself. You need to have faith in God. Now, if I was an Instagram therapist, I would have like a nice little meme, have faith in yourself. But what my clients frequently say to me is like, how do you do that? How does one go about actually developing faith in themselves? So I'll tell you how. Real simple. Okay. Steve, you're sitting right here. So I'm gonna use you as a volunteer. Let me just walk you through some questioning. Okay. Have you been through difficult things before? Many. Yeah, he's saying many. Okay. And did those things kill you? Almost. Okay. But are you sitting here right now? Okay. So don't worry, guys. Steve is in fact sitting here. While you were going through the things that you were going through, did you develop skills, whether healthy or unhealthy? It doesn't matter. Did you develop a set of skills to manage what it was you were going through? He says, absolutely. And furthermore, do you still possess those skills to this day? Okay, fantastic. And furthermore, let's say you go through something that you don't currently possess skills for. Do you have the ability to develop new skills? Absolutely. So why would you worry about anything? What is the word that we use to describe a person's faith in oneself? I'll give you a hint. It starts with a C and ends with an confidence. Confidence is the cure for anxiety. Confidence is the cure for anxiety. Let me prove it. Okay, today's Tuesday. Yeah, good. I don't even know what day it is. I'm sorry, everything blurs together. Today's Tuesday. Imagine on Friday, I have a big test. Now, if I know the information cold, am I going to walk into that test with anxiety? No, because I'm confident in the information. Okay. However, let's say it's Friday and I haven't read 2 chapters. Then what? Then I'm going to be very anxious. Okay. So what we have to understand is the more confident we can be, the less anxiety we're going to experience. Let's go even further. So let's talk about a really fun exercise that I do with my clients who are struggling to have confidence through certain situations. There is something called meditatio malorum. I promise that's not a Harry Potter spell. Okay, meditatio malorum. This comes from the ancient Stoic philosophers. And what meditatio malorum means is it means a meditation on evil outcomes. So I'll put it like this. Does anyone here know what catastrophizing is? Can we kind of like have a basic understanding of what catastrophizing is? Yeah, it's basically when our minds go to like DEFCON 6 automatically, right? We just immediately go to the worst case scenario, right? But now here's a question for you. What if in fact, we actually go there deliberately? What if we go to the worst case scenario deliberately, not with automatic thinking? We go there deliberately. We ask ourselves, okay, what is the worst thing that could happen? Because, you take away its power. And not only do you take away its power, you're also coming up with a solution. Because if I could handle the worst thing that could possibly happen, why would I worry about anything? So go to the worst case scenario, come up with a plan, do it deliberately, be practical. And then what you do is you say to yourself, okay, well, if I could handle the worst case scenario, everything else pales in comparison. So this is how we develop faith in ourselves, right? But now we have to talk about faith in God. So I'll share with you something that was taught to me by a Chabad rabbi in Kansas City, Rabbi Shalom Weinberg. And he famously says this, and it's pretty mind-boggling based off what he says. Listen to what he says. He says, it doesn't matter whether or not you believe in God. It's a Chabad rabbi. He says, it doesn't matter whether or not you believe in God. He says, what matters more is that you recognize how deeply God believes in you. This is an unbelievable statement. Because you have to understand, in many religions, it's like, how do I get myself closer to God, blah, 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 blah. That's not Judaism. The Jewish way is we want to bring God into this world. You know, the Rebbe always spoke about building a dira tachton. Actually translates to a lower apartment for God to dwell in this world. Remember, he had to remove himself through that whole tzimtzum thing, but he wants to be here. How can we bring him here? It's us working on our stuff, finding those broken pieces and finding ways to elevate them and fix them. So there's another rabbi, and he's quite amazing. He goes by Rabbi Nachman of Breslov. The Breslovers in Israel are really fun. They wear like these crazy yarmulkes that have like the na 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 written across it and little pom pom on top. And like if you're stuck in traffic in Israel, they like jump out of your car, they pull you out of your car, and they dance with you on the side of the highway, only exacerbating the traffic that's currently in existence. Right? You know what I'm talking about? They're fun. But Rabbi Nachman of Breslov famously says that the only reason why a person is born into this world is because God senses a deficiency in existence. This is unbelievably profound. This means that out of all the 7.5 billion people currently in existence, God recognized there was a deficiency. There was a dynamic that had gone unaddressed. And hence, another person needs to be born. This means that everyone from the Wall Street billionaire to the homeless bum on the street are equally valuable in God's eyes. That is an incredible thing to think about. And you know, here's the thing. God has faith in us. God believes in us. That's why we're here. We're put in this world for a mission to make an impact. And God basically says, like, look, this sounds a little arbitrary to me. I don't know if you know this, but apparently Hasidus explains that when people go to sleep, 1/60th of your soul goes up to heaven to like rejuvenate itself, charge itself up. 1/60th, I feel like that's kind of a weird number. I don't know where they come up with 1/60th. The point is, that was how I'm talking to the rabbis. I'm like, I don't know. I'm all mystical. That makes no sense to me. Point is that while your soul is up there, God's having a conversation with you. He's saying, Charles, yo, today, man, dude, you were horrible today, dude. I don't know what you were doing, but that was a disaster. What are you doing, man? And God's like, look, I do love you. I do care about you. So like, and you have this mission in this world. So I'm going to give you another chance. I'm going to wake you up tomorrow morning, and please try to not be so terrible. Please try to improve yourself. Okay. And that's why we say Modeh Ani. Okay. How Modeh Ani ends, your faithfulness in me is great. That's what we're saying to God. We're saying to God, you have faith in me, and I recognize that. That is an unbelievable thing to think about and contemplate, how deeply we are valued and cherished by our Creator. So if you recognize that God has gotten you through everything that you've been through thus far, all the challenges, I mean, I'll tell you something, okay? Obviously, I don't know if the man bun gives it away, but prior to like becoming religious, my life was a little complicated, to put it lightly. You know, and I remember I went to my rabbi. Actually, I told you I went to school in Kansas, so I went to the rabbi in Kansas, and he invited me over, and he said, "Charles, tell me about yourself." And I could tell you that, like, we were both crying by the end of my story, where I was holding in life. I was doing some very negative things. I have family on this, so like I can't disclose everything, but I was doing some really negative things. And the rabbi turns to me and he says, "I'm jealous of you." I said, "You're jealous of me? My life is falling apart. What do you mean you're jealous of me?" He says, "I am very complacent. I have a wife, I have a kid, I have a job. I'm good. You are struggling." I remember what we said at the very beginning. Every challenge that God blesses us with is an opportunity for positive growth. This is huge. So what we have to understand is that if God is, and he said, if God is blessing you with these challenges, with these opportunities for growth, that's God's expression of his love for you. God loves us very deeply. In fact, I'm going to tell you something kind of scary. Okay, there are many differences between Judaism and Christianity. Probably the biggest difference is that in Christianity, you have God who's good and the devil who's not. In Judaism, it's Einod Milvado. It's only God. That's kind of scary given the fact that like 80 years ago, 1/3 of our people were wiped off this planet for no apparent reason. That wasn't the devil, that was God. So this is where faith comes in. We have to have faith that God knows something that we don't. We have to have faith that there is a plan for us, that we were put in this world for a reason, that this is not random. And if we're able to tap into that reasoning, if we're able to recognize how deeply God loves us, that every challenge he assigns us is an opportunity for development and growth and positivity, you will be indestructible. You will be absolutely indestructible. There is nothing in this world that will falter your confidence. So with all of this being said, this wisdom has been with us for generations. Use it to make yourselves the best people you can be. That's what God wants of us. He wants us taking our traits, these sphirot, he wants us taking them and refining them, channeling them in the right way. And with that, we'll be able to bring Mashiach. Because after all, this is a Chabad thing, it wouldn't be appropriate if we weren't saying Mashiach. So we're bringing Mashiach. Thank you guys. Chaim. So at this time, we're going to start taking some questions. Stop what? Oh, the sharing. Okay, I'm stopping the sharing. And now what we're going to do is we're going to start taking questions. We'll kind of alternate. We'll flip-flop between people here and also people on Zoom. So yes.
Okay.
One sec. We're going to start right here. Yeah.
1 second. We're going to address the virtual world a second.
Okay.
I just want to speak to them. Yes, we are going to be taking questions. Just to say, Charles, first of all, thank you. This was you're talking about the breaking of the vessels. You just
awesome. Thank you.
Contracted everything into this 45-minute session.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of vessels that we'll
figure it out.
Now
we'll figure it out. But yeah, we're going to begin just with this question right here. What's your question?
But it was very powerful and beautiful. So what we're going to rotate is we're going to take some questions from the crowd. I'm going to repeat it here, or you'll repeat it on your mic to the virtual, and then we'll take it from here.
And if you think about it,
go ahead.
Positive, absolutely. So basically, and tell me your name. Debbie. So what Debbie is asking is, she's saying, if we look at the Tree of Life handout that I had, if we look at the word gevura, I translated it as severity. If we think about like the root, the shorish of the word, it could also mean like strength. It could mean, it's actually gever is like a man also, I'm pretty sure. So why use the word severity? So I'll tell you this. What severity is a boundary. It's a boundary. It takes tremendous strength in order to restrain ourselves. So if you think about it, love, which is the opposite, and we'll talk about this in more depth, God willing, with another class if you guys are interested, but love is an energy that moves all things forward. We need severity and to be very severe, to be very strict in order to limit that love, because it's a very powerful emotion, right? At the end of the day, there are many translations of this word, but that's the one I chose. Okay, let's get a virtual question.
Anyone on the virtual world have a question? You can either unmute yourself or type it in the chat, or else we'll go to any people here on live.
Yep. Or if you want to, like, I think you should have the ability to raise your hand online. We could also change the view.
Right,
So,
right.
look at the gallery. There we go. Does
Right.
anyone want to unmute themselves and ask a question?
Yeah, it's not about the getting into the integral part of it, but you recorded this? Will the recording be
All
available
right, and
for
Rich is
us?
talking.
So
Did you-
Rich
what I
is
said?
just asking about the recording. Recording is available. We will speak to our technical professionals and we will let you know, but it is being recorded, so we will hopefully be able to make
Yeah, and actually,
it
let's just look at the chat. So a
available
person said,
online.
I have thinking errors at times, like catastrophic thinking.
So
I'm curious what
that's
causes this
having
way
it
of
in the
thinking to
chat.
develop. Does it stem from trauma or anxiety?
You are
It
able
absolutely
to the
does.
chat, or you want
Okay,
me to
so
read
when
that?
we go to catastrophic thinking, so I'll put it like this. Okay, let's talk about how anxiety actually arises in people. Okay, what is safety? Safety is consistency and predictability. What our brain does when we're anxious is our brain is trying to offer us a variety of different ways to protect ourselves from a million different bad things that could happen. We have a brain for two reasons: keeps us alive and comfortable, right? So how our brain keeps us alive and comfortable is it tries to come up with different things that could potentially go wrong and prepare us for them. Right now, that actually is a very important thing. We need that. If that isn't happening, we're not going to live very long. The problem is that our brain does this involuntarily, and also it frequently misinterprets situations. So why is it that we may catastrophize? Well, think about it like this. If a person lives a chaotic lifestyle, meaning there is a ton of unpredictability in their lives, it's very, very easy for that anxious thinking to kind of pop up. Why? Because when we have unpredictability, we're constantly putting out fires. You know, our brain is plastic. It slowly adapts, but it adapts at a rate that's slower than the rate of events in life. So it's actually really funny. People tend to have the worst anxiety when everything is calm in their lives. If things are genuinely going wrong, you are in crisis mode, most anxious people are very able to respond to it. It's only when things are calm and cool and collected, that's when people really start having issues. So remember, when we have chaos, it often leads to anxiety when everything kind of calms down. But when we're talking about catastrophizing, think about it. That also could come from trauma. What is trauma? Trauma is when we have a lot of unpredictability. You know, we have a change that happens that impacts us very, very deeply. So yeah. We have another question. What happens when you have dreams that produce anxiety? So what I would also tell you is that, remember, when you are anxious, your thoughts and your feelings are valid, but they do not necessarily reflect reality. Your thoughts and your feelings are valid, but they do not necessarily reflect reality. Okay. And what that means is like it's valid to say, yeah, I'm having this thought. I had a bad dream, blah, 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 blah. But just because you had a dream, that doesn't mean that that's actually going to be what transpires in real life. You know, and that's what you have to remind yourself. Just because you think something doesn't necessarily make it real. By the way, if you want a really good mantra to manage your anxiety, just tell yourself, A, I don't know, because you can't know. Remember, anxiety is all about the unknown. But B, I'll figure it out. And ultimately, you don't have a choice. You're going to have to figure it out. So any person, anytime you're anxious, just remind yourself, I don't know, but I'll figure it out. That's how we develop confidence. Is it possible to actually get over trauma is another question that's being asked. I would say, yeah, with processing. Okay. And guys, remember, okay, people will very frequently, it takes a long time to manage anxiety, depression, trauma, all these mental health things. It has to be you being willing to change yourself. No one can fix you. Okay. So understand, like, you know, people will get over, their traumas as long as they work on them. You know, the more you talk about them, the more you are able to approach them and you don't put a police line around them in your mind, it becomes much easier to handle them. Okay. So yeah. Oh, and we have a question from a person here, actually. Yes. Mm-hmm. 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 Well, so basically what you're saying is that, yeah, basically what you're saying is that, and tell me your name. Lilian. So what Lilian is saying is that there are some people who go through traumas, and what ends up happening is they become very angry. They get very, very angry. Okay. So, I mean, look, and I'll bring this up if we ever do a relationships class together or something like that. Something really interesting. There's no such thing as anger. That sounds really crazy what I'm about to say, but let me prove it. Okay. There's no such thing as anger. So remember, the question is, why is it that people become angry after experiencing traumas? There's no such thing as anger. Anger is what's known as a secondary emotion, meaning it covers up sadness, shame, and fear. So one of the ways that we process trauma and that I get my clients to process their trauma is we connect with these underlying emotions. We talk about sadness where their needs are lacking now. We talk about shame where, they need to make changes in their life. And then also fear, which is all about where they're lacking confidence. And if you kind of address those three things in that way, trauma becomes a lot more approachable. But ultimately, when it comes to trauma, it's something that, and remember, trauma is past, present, and future. We just talked about this. So I would also say with a person dealing with trauma, I don't even need my patients to tell me what happened to them. That's not even necessary. If you want to, knock yourself out. But really what we have to worry about with trauma is how it's impacting you presently. Okay. How is what happened to you in the past? How is that currently impacting you? And if we're able to address that, we could really start making strides with it. Mm-hmm. So how we control explosive anger is by, again, getting a person to connect with the sadness, shame, and fear that's underneath. That's how we do this. Okay. A few more questions. Oh, that's really good. Okay, so someone asked a question: how do I balance my views between the different theorists that we talked about, Freud, Neumann, and Carl Jung? Really, so the question that a good therapist is always going to ask at the beginning of a therapy session is, what is it that my client needs? So how I evaluate like which theory I'm going to use is I think about like, where is my client most hurting? Is it the past? Is it the future? Is it, in their relationships, or is it like their purpose in life? And based on those things, that's how I pick my theory. Yep. Any other questions?
There's another question in the chat. You skipped over it.
I don't know what it is. You want to read it out loud?
Can post-traumatic stress occur decades?
What about post-traumatic stress?
Can it occur decades after the original incident that caused the original trauma, especially if the person was a child when it happened?
I don't.
I'm here we go. Sit over again to
can post-traumatic stress occur decades after the incident that causes the original trauma, especially if the trauma happened as a child? Hold on. Person was a child when it happened. Okay, so yes, absolutely. Post-traumatic stress. So you have to understand, one of the things that people do when they face trauma is they have a bunch of coping skills. They're actually called ego defenses, if we're going to use psychoanalytic terms. And basically what that is we find ways to kind of protect our egos. Our ego is the source of our self-esteem, our pride, things like that. So some of them are repression, where like we we unintentionally kind of cut off and compartmentalize what it is that happened to us. But also there's something called suppression, where we like intentionally cut that stuff off. Okay, we compartmentalize. So whenever something triggers us or breaks that compartment that we put it in, it's very easy for it to pop up again. How do you do it? Well, in therapy. how do you face this stuff? In therapy. If you've been through something and you realize like, hey, it's popping out. And by the way, this isn't a question. I just want to bring this up for everyone who's involved in this, because I think it's really, really important. People ask me all the time why and when to come to therapy. Why should I go to therapy? When should I go to therapy? So I want to give you like a really easy answer for this. So if you think about it, human beings exist on a spectrum, okay? And on one side of the spectrum are things that we have to accept, and the other side is things that we have to change. Okay, now our goal is, as human beings, we should always be moving on that spectrum. There are certain things we got to change. There are certain things we got to accept. It doesn't matter which side you're going to. It just matters that you're moving on that spectrum. Okay, it's when you get stuck and you can't know which way to go, whether I have to accept something, when you're struggling to accept something or you're struggling to change something, that's when it's time to seek a therapist. Okay. Questions, comments, concerns, moral outrages, anything? Yeah. Mhm. Yep. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Exactly. I mean, so what Steve is basically saying is that, when an animal has like literally a deer in the headlight experience, human beings can have that as well. So and animals are obviously unable to move through it as well as humans are. As human beings, remember, okay, we are at the prime of creation. We embody God's image, okay? But it's our job, basically. The reason why we were put in this world is to refine it. It's to make this place a better place to live. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to elevate this world. And that's actually what brings Mashiach. What brings Mashiach is when every person is going to try their best to like refine themselves. It's actually very interesting when we learn about these different spheres, the sphirot. What it basically says is you should use the sphirot to analyze the world around you, right? And the thing is like when you have a conceptualization of how the sphirot operate, you no longer see walls, you just see gvura. You no longer, you're able to kind of recognize it's not just communication, it's not just connection, it's kingship, it's malchut that you're expressing. So that's what we want to do. We want to analyze the world through this. We want to conceptualize our world through these sphirot. And the more we balance them appropriately in our behavior, the better life is going to get for us. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. So guys, it's a huge pleasure. I just want to do some shameless, and we have a question here. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep. And my understanding is Kabbalah teaches God is within, mm-hmm. God is in the breath. Mm-hmm. Do you find if a client is open to talking about that, mm-hmm. that you bring that in as part of the therapy process? So like I told you, so the question that was asked, this is an excellent question, is, when you're working with a client, do I bring God into the therapeutic process if the person is open to it? And will that help them? And the answer is absolutely. Okay, because unfortunately, like the whole idea why we need God more than anything is we have to understand nothing in life is random. There are a lot of people who look at their lives and seemingly horrible things happen to them. If you believe in God and you're able to trust in the fact that God knows something that you don't, that right there is unbelievably powerful. And by the way, like I told you, we conceptualize people biopsychosocial when you're being trained in graduate school. The spiritual element is frequently left out. And I think that is a major detriment to therapists. I think it's very, very important that people possess some form of spirituality, spirituality being our capacity to connect to stuff that's bigger than us. If you don't have that, I literally have no idea how a person can live. So, but that's an excellent question. Cool. So just shameless plug. If you guys liked what you heard, please check out www.talktocharlie.net. Feel free to reach out to me. I could put it in the chat as well. It's www.talktocharlie.net, CHARLIE. Feel free to send me messages. While it's hard to sometimes respond, I do read everything that comes to me. And I will definitely do my best to reach out. Yes, LIE. So it's www.talktocharlie.net. Also, I am also, because I'm a clinical psychotherapist, but I'm also a professional rapper. I got to make my mom proud somehow. So if you're in the mood for some psychological music and Kabbalistic music, it's hardcharlie.com. Please find me on social media. I'm literally everywhere. And if tonight impacted you, I love hearing about that. As a therapist, I could tell you the greatest gifts that I get from my clients are just, people who send me a message saying, hey, you really made an impact on me. That's the only reason why we're alive. We're alive to make an impact on each other. And I really care about this. This is something that, my goal is to put myself out of business. I want everyone to be stable. I want everyone to be confident. I want everybody to have their needs met. And I really think that if we work towards that, we're going to see major changes in this world. So thank you.
Thank you, Charlie. This was wonderful. And this is just the beginning, I guess, right?
This is just the beginning.
Okay.
God willing, we'll do more classes in the future. If you like this, please reach out to the rabbis and tell them that you like this and you want more.
Yes, if you've gotten the emails with the reservations, please respond to those emails. Give us your feedback. So Charlie's literally, he's
I live here in Cherry Hill. And I also, I have a booming practice here. I do have a waiting list, but if people are looking for a therapist, I'm happy to always talk. And if I can't help you, I will definitely refer you to someone who can.
But if you say Chabad, you speed up the booming waiting list.
I do my best.
You do your
best.
best. Okay.
That is for sure.
So we're thankful that you were here.
Absolutely.
Okay. We're wishing a good night to our virtual world. Wishing everybody well. Thank you for joining us and have a wonderful evening.
Alrighty. Guys, thank you so much. Huge pleasure.